The crystal chandelier cast warm light across Uncle Tom's dining room as I smoothed my dress and took a deep breath. This was it. This was finally my moment to share the incredible news with my family. After months of working 18-hour days from my cramped studio apartment, surviving on instant ramen and pure determination, my startup had just hit a major milestone. We'd reached 50,000 active users, landed 3 enterprise clients, and I'd finally moved into a real office space. My heart pounded with excitement as I imagined their faces lighting up with pride. "So, Maya," my cousin Jennifer was saying, "are you still doing that computer thing?" Perfect opening. I set down my wine glass and felt the familiar flutter of nervous energy. "Actually, I have some amazing news to share with everyone. My company just—" "Maya, sweetie." Uncle Tom's voice cut through mine like a blade, his tone patronizing yet firm. He didn't even look up from cutting his prime rib as he continued. "Let's not talk about your little computer thing tonight. This dinner is for the real professionals in the family." The words hit me like a physical blow. My excitement deflated instantly, replaced by a burning sensation that started in my chest and spread to my cheeks. The entire table went silent. 18 people suddenly found their plates fascinating. The only sounds were the clink of silverware and the soft jazz playing from Uncle Tom's expensive sound system. My brother David, resplendent in his tailored navy suit, couldn't suppress a smirk as he adjusted his Rolex. "Uncle Tom's right," he said, dabbing his mouth with his napkin. "Tonight's about celebrating real achievements. Sarah just made senior marketing director at her firm, and I closed the Morrison case last week." "Congratulations, David," Aunt Patricia beamed, raising her glass. "A 6-figure settlement, wasn't it?" "7 figures, actually," David replied with false modesty, basking in the chorus of impressed murmurs that followed. I sat frozen, my prepared words about user growth and revenue projections dying in my throat. My mother Linda avoided my eyes entirely, suddenly very interested in rearranging the flowers in the centerpiece. My father Robert cleared his throat uncomfortably, but said nothing. Even Grandma Rose, usually my gentlest supporter, looked down at her hands folded in her lap. "Maya works so hard on her little projects," my mother finally offered, her voice thin and apologetic. "But tonight, let's focus on the successes we can all understand." Uncle Tom nodded approvingly. "Exactly. We've got David making partner track at Morrison, Klein & Associates, Sarah climbing the corporate ladder, your father's pension plan performing beautifully. These are real accomplishments, measurable, secure." The conversation seamlessly moved on without me. David launched into a story about his latest courtroom victory, while everyone hung on his every word. I picked at my food, each bite tasting like sawdust, while the laughter and animated conversations swirled around me. My phone buzzed with notifications from my team celebrating our latest client win, but the excitement felt hollow now. I had walked into this dinner feeling like I was finally becoming someone worthy of their respect. Instead, I was reminded that in their eyes, I would always be the family dreamer playing pretend at business while the real adults handled serious matters. The humiliation was complete, and dinner had barely begun. Sitting there in Uncle Tom's dining room, picking at my untouched salmon, the familiar sting of dismissal transported me back through years of identical moments. This wasn't new. This was the story of my entire life. I was 8 years old again, standing in our kitchen with a crude drawing of a robot I'd designed. "Look, Mom, I made an invention that helps people," I'd announced proudly, holding up my crayon masterpiece, complete with labeled buttons and functions. "That's nice, sweetie," Mom had said without looking up from David's math homework spread across the counter. "David, show Maya how you solved this algebra problem. Maybe she can learn something." David, already 10 and insufferably superior, had rolled his eyes. "Maya, that's just a silly drawing. I'm doing real math. This is what smart kids do." Even then, the message was crystal clear. David was the achiever, I was the dreamer. David got the attention, I got the pat on the head. High school brought more of the same. While David collected academic awards and varsity letters, I spent hours teaching myself to code in my bedroom. I'd stay up until 2 a.m. building websites and simple games, my eyes burning from screen glare, fingers flying across the keyboard as I lost myself in the logical beauty of programming languages. Maya got another B+, Mom would announce at dinner, her tone disappointed. David never got anything below an A. I built an app that helps students organize their homework, I'd interject desperately. 300 kids at school are already using it. Dad would nod politely. That's wonderful, honey. But grades matter for college applications. David's Harvard interview is next week. The pattern continued through college. David sailed through law school at Northwestern, while I struggled through my MBA program, my heart never really in it. When I'd call home excited about a coding project, Mom would redirect the conversation to David's internship at a prestigious firm. He's making real connections, she'd say, building a real future. The breaking point came 2 years ago, when I finally found the courage to drop out of my MBA program. I'd been accepted into a competitive startup accelerator, but I needed to commit fully. The phone call to my parents still echoed in my memory. "You're throwing away your education," Mom had cried, her voice breaking. "For what? Some fantasy about computers?" "It's not a fantasy, Mom. This is a real opportunity." "Real?" Dad had interrupted. "Real is David's job offer. Real is security. Real is being able to support a family." The family WhatsApp group became a daily reminder of my perceived failures. David's promotion announcement had garnered 17 congratulations and celebration emojis. When I'd shared that my app had been featured in TechCrunch, I got 3 polite, "That's nice" responses and immediate silence. Last Christmas, Uncle Tom had cornered me at the family party. "Maya, I know a guy who runs it at my construction company. Maybe it's time to get serious about your future instead of playing around with these computer games." Even my successes were diminished, reframed as hobbies rather than achievements. Every family gathering reinforced the same narrative. David was building something real and respectable, while I was chasing childish dreams that would inevitably lead to disappointment. Now, 24 years old and finally seeing real results, I was still the family dreamer whose accomplishments didn't count. The contrast between my life and my family's couldn't have been starker. While David posted Instagram stories from expensive steakhouses and weekend getaways to Napa Valley, I celebrated landing my first paying client with a gas station coffee and a stale donut from the convenience store downstairs from my office space. My office was generous terminology for what was essentially a converted storage closet in a co-working space in the less fashionable part of downtown. The fluorescent lights flickered constantly, the air conditioning worked sporadically, and I could hear every conversation through the paper-thin walls. But it was mine, and it was where I was building something real, even if my family couldn't see it. My daily routine looked nothing like the polished professional life David flaunted. I woke up at 5 a.m. in my studio apartment, where my bed doubled as my couch and my kitchen table served as my secondary workspace. Breakfast was instant oatmeal or whatever was on sale at the grocery store. While David grabbed artisanal lattes on his way to his corner office, I nursed the same cup of black coffee from my dented travel mug throughout most of the morning. The loneliness was the hardest part. Family gatherings became exercises in endurance, each one a fresh reminder of how little they understood or valued what I was trying to build. At my cousin's wedding last spring, I'd been seated at the kids' table, despite being 24, while David was positioned prominently with the other successful adults. "So, Maya," my great-aunt Helen had asked with that pitying smile I'd grown to hate, "when are you going to get a real job? You can't play on computers forever." "I'm not playing," I'd tried to explain. "I'm building software that helps small businesses manage their inventory more efficiently. We've already helped our clients save over $200,000 collectively." She'd patted my hand condescendingly. "That's sweet, dear. But wouldn't you be happier with something stable? Maybe David could help you get an interview at his firm." Uncle Tom's jokes were the worst. At every family barbecue, birthday party, or holiday gathering, he'd find a way to work in some comment about my computer hobby. Last 4th of July, he'd announced to a group of his business friends, "This is my niece Maya. She's still figuring out what she wants to be when she grows up." The laughter that followed felt like acid in my stomach. Even my mother's attempts at support felt backhanded. "Maya's so creative," she'd tell people, using the same tone others might use to describe a child's finger painting. "She's always been our little dreamer." The word little was always there, diminishing everything I touched. The financial reality made everything worse. While David could afford his luxury apartment and expensive suits, I lived paycheck to paycheck, reinvesting every penny back into the company. I wore the same 3 professional outfits to meetings, hoping clients wouldn't notice the rotation. I walked to save on Uber fees, packed lunches to avoid restaurant expenses, and hadn't bought new clothes in 8 months. Social media became torture. David's LinkedIn posts about thrilled to announce and excited to share achievements got hundreds of likes and congratulations. When I shared news about our app hitting 10,000 users, my post got 12 likes, mostly from college friends and fellow entrepreneurs I'd met at networking events. The worst part was the doubt their constant dismissal planted in my own mind. During the hardest days, when clients were slow to pay or technical problems kept me up all night, I'd wonder if they were right. Maybe I was just a dreamer. Maybe I should have listened when David offered to get me an interview at his firm. But then I'd look at the testimonials from small business owners whose lives our software had genuinely improved, and I'd remember why I started this journey in the first place. 3 months before Uncle Tom's reunion dinner, everything changed overnight. I was working late in my cramped office space, debugging code and surviving on my 3rd cup of instant coffee, when my phone started buzzing incessantly. At first I ignored it, assuming it was spam calls, but the notifications kept coming. Email after email flooded my inbox. My app's user dashboard showed numbers I'd never seen before. We'd gone viral. A small business owner in Portland had posted a video review of our inventory management software on TikTok, explaining how it had saved her boutique from bankruptcy by optimizing her stock levels and reducing waste. The video exploded overnight, racking up over 2 million views and spawning dozens of copycat reviews from other small business owners sharing their success stories. Within 48 hours, we jumped from 10,000 users to over 50,000. My customer service inbox was flooded with upgrade requests, partnership inquiries, and media requests. 3 major business publications wanted interviews. A venture capital firm reached out asking for a meeting. I sat in my flickering light office at 2 a.m., staring at numbers I'd only dreamed of, and felt a surge of vindication so powerful it made my hands shake. This was it. This was the moment that would finally prove to my family that I wasn't just playing around with computers. I called my mom first, unable to contain my excitement. "Mom, you're not going to believe what happened," I practically shouted into the phone. "My app went viral. We have 50,000 users now, and I just signed 3 major clients today. We're looking at 6-figure revenue projections for the next quarter." There was a pause that lasted too long. "That's wonderful, honey," she said, but her tone was cautious, almost worried. "But remember, these internet things can be very unpredictable. One good month doesn't make a career." My excitement deflated slightly, but I pressed on. "Mom, this isn't just one good month. We've been growing steadily for 8 months, and now we're scaling rapidly. I'm hiring my first full-time employee next week." "Maya, sweetheart," she interrupted gently, "I'm happy that you're having success, but maybe you should still consider David's offer to get you an interview at his firm. As a backup plan. These startup things are so risky." The words hit me like cold water. Even in my moment of triumph, she couldn't see past her preconceptions. "Mom, this is real success. We're helping thousands of small businesses operate more efficiently. I know you think that, honey, but stability matters. David just got another promotion, He's on track to make partner before he's 30. That's the kind of success that lasts." I hung up, feeling deflated and confused. I'd expected celebration, validation, maybe even pride. Instead, I got a lecture about backup plans and stability. The same message I'd been hearing my entire life. What I was doing didn't count as real success. I tried calling David next, hoping maybe my brother would understand the significance of what was happening. He answered on the 4th ring, clearly distracted. "Maya, what's up? I'm reviewing briefs for court tomorrow." "David, I wanted to share some incredible news. My company just hit 50,000 users, and we're scaling faster than I ever imagined possible. That's great, he said, but I could hear him typing in the background. Listen, I've been meaning to talk to you about this whole startup thing. My firm is expanding their tech compliance department. It might be a good time for you to transition into something more stable. Transition? David, I'm not looking to transition. I'm looking to grow. We might need to raise a Series A round soon. He sighed, the way adults sigh when children don't understand something obvious. Maya, I admire your optimism, but 90% of startups fail within the first 2 years. You're still in the danger zone. It might be smart to start planning your exit strategy while things are going well. Even my biggest success was being framed as a fortunate accident that I should abandon before it inevitably collapsed. The family WhatsApp group response was even more telling. I shared a screenshot of a TechCrunch article mentioning our company's rapid growth. David's engagement announcement that same week got 23 congratulations and heart emojis. My startup milestone got 4 polite responses. That's nice. Congratulations, and 2 thumbs up emojis. The message was clear. Even my victories weren't worth celebrating. The anticipation for Uncle Tom's reunion had been building for weeks. Despite my family's lukewarm response to my recent success, part of me still hoped this gathering would be different. Maybe seeing my confidence, hearing about our continued growth, or witnessing my genuine happiness would finally shift their perspective. I'd prepared what I thought were compelling talking points about our expansion, our client testimonials, and our projected revenue growth. I arrived at Uncle Tom's sprawling suburban home wearing my best dress, the one professional outfit I'd splurged on after our first major client payment. The house buzzed with the familiar energy of a Chen family gathering. My mother arranging appetizers in the kitchen, my father discussing golf scores with my uncles, and David holding court near the fireplace, already regaling cousins with stories from his latest courtroom victory. For the first hour, I managed to stay optimistic. I helped my mother in the kitchen, made small talk with relatives I hadn't seen in months, and even managed to laugh at Uncle Tom's tired jokes about millennials and their phones. When the conversation naturally drifted toward career updates, I felt my moment approaching. But then came the moment at dinner when Uncle Tom cut me off so dismissively, and I felt that familiar sting of humiliation wash over me. The worst part wasn't just his words, though they hurt. It was the way everyone else nodded along, as if my exclusion from real professionals was obvious and appropriate. I excused myself from the table, claiming I needed to use the bathroom, but really I needed a moment to collect myself. The hallway felt like a refuge from the suffocating atmosphere of condescension. I was checking my phone, reading encouraging messages from my team about a new client we'd landed that afternoon, when I heard voices from the kitchen. Uncle Tom's voice carried clearly through the doorway. "Thank God one of Linda's kids has sense," he was saying. "Maya's living in complete fantasy land. Someone needs to talk sense into her before she wastes more years of her life on this computer nonsense." I froze, my phone nearly slipping from my hands. "I know exactly what you mean," David replied, his voice carrying that familiar tone of authority he used when dispensing wisdom. "I've tried talking to her, Uncle Tom. I really have. I even offered to get her interviews at 3 different firms, but she won't listen to reason." "It's sad, really," Uncle Tom continued. "Such a bright girl, but she's completely delusional about this whole entrepreneur thing. Linda and Robert are worried sick about her future." "Honestly?" David lowered his voice conspiratorially. "I think she'll have to fail completely before she grows up. Sometimes people need to hit rock bottom to accept reality. Maybe when she runs out of money and has to move back in with Mom and Dad, she'll finally understand what the rest of us have been trying to tell her." Uncle Tom chuckled. "Poor Linda. She's so embarrassed when people ask about Maya's business. She never knows what to say." "The worst part is Maya actually thinks she's successful now," David continued. "She called me a few months ago, acting like she'd won the lottery because her app got some downloads. She doesn't understand that real success takes years to build. I mean, I worked 80-hour weeks for 3 years just to make senior associate." "Exactly. Real achievement requires sacrifice and commitment to something substantial, not playing games on a computer and calling it work." I stood paralyzed in that hallway, every word landing like a physical blow. This wasn't just casual dismissal or misunderstanding. This was a complete character assassination by the two men in my family whose approval I'd spent years trying to earn. They weren't just skeptical about my choices, they actively wanted me to fail. They were counting on my failure as validation of their worldview. The betrayal cut deeper than I'd expected because I realized they'd been having conversations like this for months, maybe years. Behind every polite smile and half-hearted, "That's nice, dear," they'd been collectively writing me off as a delusional child playing dress-up in the business world. "Should we say something to her tonight?" Uncle Tom asked. "No point," David replied. "She's too stubborn to listen. Better to just wait it out. Reality has a way of humbling people." I slipped back to the bathroom and stared at my reflection in Uncle Tom's ornate mirror. My cheeks were flushed, my eyes bright with unshed tears. The woman looking back at me was a successful entrepreneur who'd built something real and valuable. But in this house, surrounded by these people, I felt like a foolish little girl whose dreams were nothing more than embarrassing delusions. The worst part was realizing that even my recent success hadn't changed their fundamental view of me. No amount of growth, revenue, or recognition would ever be enough to earn their respect because they'd already decided I was destined to fail. I returned to the dinner table, feeling like I was walking underwater. Every sound seemed muffled. Every conversation felt distant and surreal. The warm lighting that had seemed so inviting when I arrived now felt harsh and exposing. I slid back into my chair, my hands trembling slightly as I reached for my water glass, hoping no one would notice the emotional earthquake happening inside me. The conversation had moved on to wedding planning. Sarah was showing everyone photos on her phone of potential venues, while David beamed beside her, his arm draped possessively across the back of her chair. "We're thinking spring in Napa," Sarah was saying. "David knows a judge who could officiate, and his firm has connections with the best wedding planners in the area." "How wonderful," Aunt Patricia gushed. "A destination wedding for our successful lawyer." I stared at my plate, mechanically cutting my salmon into smaller and smaller pieces without eating any of it. The voices around me became white noise as my mind replayed every word I'd overheard in the kitchen. Living in complete fantasy land. Completely delusional. Poor Linda, she's so embarrassed. My phone buzzed against my leg. A text from my lead developer. "Maya, the Johnson account just upgraded to our premium package. That's $15K in additional revenue this month. You're crushing it." The irony was devastating. Here I was, receiving real validation for real achievements, while sitting surrounded by people who considered my success an embarrassing delusion. I quickly silenced my phone and shoved it back into my purse. "Maya, honey, you're so quiet tonight," my mother said, her voice tinged with that familiar note of worry that meant she was about to say something that would make everything worse. "Are you feeling all right?" All eyes turned to me. I felt exposed, like a specimen under a microscope. "I'm fine," I managed, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. "She's probably tired from all that computer work," Uncle Tom said with a chuckle that made my skin crawl. "All those late nights playing around on the internet must be exhausting." A few people laughed. David smirked. My father looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Again. "Actually," I said, finding a thread of my voice, "we just landed another major client today. We're scaling faster than—" "That's wonderful, sweetheart," my mother interrupted quickly, the way you might cut off a child who's telling an inappropriately long story. "But let's not bore everyone with work talk. Sarah was telling us about the wedding flowers." The dismissal was so swift and complete that it took my breath away. I felt like I was disappearing, becoming smaller with each passing moment. The success I'd worked so hard to achieve, the validation I'd finally started to feel from the market and my clients, all of it evaporated in the face of my family's determined indifference. I excused myself again, this time claiming I needed some fresh air. I stepped onto Uncle Tom's back patio, where the cool evening air felt like a relief against my burning cheeks. Through the sliding glass door, I could see my family continuing their animated conversations, completely unaffected by my absence. Standing there alone under the stars, I felt the full weight of my isolation. I was surrounded by people who were supposed to love and support me, but I'd never felt more alone in my life. They'd made their judgment about who I was and what I was capable of, and no amount of actual success would change their minds. For the first time since starting my company, I began to question everything. I stood on Uncle Tom's patio for what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 minutes, trying to compose myself before facing the dinner table again. The cool evening air helped clear my head, but it couldn't wash away the sting of overhearing my brother and uncle's conversation. I was steeling myself to go back inside and endure the rest of the evening when I heard the sliding door open behind me. "Maya, sweetheart?" I turned to find Grandma Rose stepping carefully onto the patio, her weathered hands gripping her wooden cane. At 78, she moved slowly but with purpose, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the evening breeze. She was wearing her favorite navy blue dress, the one she saved for special occasions, and her eyes held a warmth that I hadn't seen from anyone else tonight. "Grandma, you don't need to come out here," I said quickly, moving to help her. "It's getting chilly." "Nonsense," she said, waving me off with surprising strength. "These old bones have survived worse than a little evening air. Besides, I wanted to talk to you away from all that noise inside." We stood together in comfortable silence for a moment, looking out at Uncle Tom's meticulously manicured garden. Grandma Rose had always been different from the rest of the family. While everyone else focused on conventional success markers, she had a way of seeing things that others missed. "You know," she said quietly, her voice carrying a slight tremor that came with age but losing none of its conviction. "I started my tailoring business when everyone said women shouldn't work outside the home." I looked at her in surprise. Grandma Rose rarely talked about her working years, and when she did, it was usually brief mentions of helping out with the family finances. "It was 1965, she continued, her eyes distant with memory. "Your grandfather had just gotten laid off from the factory, and we had 3 small children to feed. I'd been sewing clothes for the family for years, so I decided to start taking in work from neighbors, just a few alterations here and there." She paused, adjusting her grip on her cane. "Your grandfather's family was furious. They said it was shameful for a woman to work when she should be home with her children. They called it my little sewing hobby, and kept asking when I was going to stop embarrassing the family with my playing around." My heart skipped. The parallels were impossible to ignore. "What happened?" I asked softly. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "I kept sewing. Started with 1 neighbor, then 2, then 5. Before long, I had a waiting list 3 months long. Word spread about my work, and suddenly I was making more money than your grandfather ever did at the factory." She turned to face me directly, her eyes sharp and knowing. "I see that same fire in your eyes, Maya. The same determination I had when everyone thought I was wasting my time. Don't let them dim it." The words hit me like a lifeline thrown to a drowning person. "But Grandma, they think I'm delusional. They think I'm going to fail." "They thought I was going to fail too," she said, reaching out to squeeze my hand with surprising strength. "But failure isn't falling down, sweetheart. Failure is staying down. And I've watched you these past 2 years, and you're not the staying down type." She glanced back at the house, where we could hear David's voice booming through the glass. "That boy has never had to fight for anything in his life. Success came easy to him, so he thinks that's the only way it works. But you and I, we know different. We know that the best victories are the ones you have to claw your way toward." Before I could respond, she pulled out her phone, an ancient iPhone that she'd finally learned to use after years of resistance. "I want you to have my number, not the house phone that everyone uses. My personal number. I want to hear about your real successes, not the watered-down versions you share at family dinners." As she slowly made her way back toward the house, she paused at the door. "Maya, I need you to promise me something. Promise me you won't give up on what you're building. Promise me you won't let their fears become your fears." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "Good," she said with a satisfied nod. "Now let's go back inside. I have a feeling your story is just getting started. Grandma Rose's words became my secret fuel over the following months. Her encouragement created a protective shield around my ambition, insulating me from the constant drip of family skepticism. I threw myself into work with renewed intensity, but this time it felt different. I wasn't just building a business, I was proving something to myself that had nothing to do with their approval. The transformation started immediately. Within 2 weeks of the reunion, I closed our biggest deal yet, a $75,000 annual contract with a regional restaurant chain that needed our inventory management system across 43 locations. Instead of calling my parents with the news, I texted Grandma Rose first. "Grandma, we just signed our largest client ever. $75K annually," I typed, my fingers shaking with excitement. Her response came within minutes. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. Your grandfather would have loved to see this. Keep building your empire." That text message lived in my favorites folder, a constant reminder that someone in my family actually believed in what I was doing. The months that followed became a masterclass in quiet determination. I hired Sarah Kim, a brilliant software engineer who'd been laid off from a Fortune 500 company, as my first full-time employee. Then came Marcus Rodriguez, a sales specialist who understood small business needs better than anyone I'd ever met. My cramped co-working space evolved into a proper office in a converted warehouse downtown, complete with whiteboard walls and a coffee station that actually worked. But I kept these victories largely to myself, sharing them only with Grandma Rose through our private text exchanges. When family asked about my computer thing at smaller gatherings, I'd give deliberately vague responses. "It's going well," I'd say with a modest smile, while internally celebrating the fact that we'd just hit $200,000 in annual recurring revenue. The contrast became stark at my cousin Jennifer's birthday party in March. David arrived late, fresh from a client dinner, and immediately commanded attention with stories about his latest case victory. "I just saved a Fortune 500 company $15 million in potential damages," he announced to the gathered relatives. The opposing counsel didn't even see it coming. The room erupted in impressed murmurs and congratulations. Uncle Tom slapped David on the back with pride. Mom beamed like David had personally cured cancer. "What about you, Maya?" Jennifer asked dutifully. "How's your business going?" "Oh, keeping busy," I replied, taking a sip of my wine. "Same old stuff, really." What I didn't mention was that earlier that week, we'd been featured in Entrepreneur magazine as one of 20 startups revolutionizing small business technology. The article included a photo of me in our new office, discussing how our platform had helped clients collectively save over $2 million in operational costs. Grandma Rose had texted me a screenshot of the article with 3 fire emojis, and the message, "My granddaughter, the revolutionist." The secret success felt like wearing armor. While my family continued their pattern of dismissive comments and backhanded concern, I was quietly building something that industry experts were taking notice of. TechCrunch reached out for a follow-up interview. 2 venture capital firms requested pitch meetings. A major business school invited me to speak at their entrepreneurship conference. Each achievement went into my private victory collection, shared only with Grandma Rose and celebrated in our text exchanges. She became my secret cheerleader, sending encouraging messages before big meetings and celebrating milestones that my parents didn't even know existed. "Another client signed today," I'd text her. "We're officially profitable." "I always knew you had the magic touch," she'd respond. "Your great-grandmother started with nothing but a dream, too. It runs in the family, even if the rest of them forgot." The most satisfying part was watching my family's continued blindness to what was happening right under their noses. They were so invested in their narrative of Maya the dreamer that they couldn't see Maya the achiever emerging right in front of them. But I was patient. I was building something bigger than their skepticism, and soon enough, the world would notice. As my company continued its explosive growth through the spring and early summer, my family's blindness to my success became almost comical. They were so entrenched in their view of me as the impractical dreamer that they couldn't see the forest for the trees, even as evidence of my achievements accumulated right in front of them. David's promotion to senior partner became the family's obsession. At every gathering, every phone call, every family group chat, the conversation inevitably circled back to David's meteoric rise at Morrison, Klein and Associates. He'd moved into a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown, bought a BMW, and started wearing suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Can you believe our David is the youngest senior partner in the firm's history?" Mom would gush to anyone who'd listen. "He's already being considered for the partnership track. We might have a named partner in the family." Uncle Tom had started introducing David as "my nephew, the hotshot lawyer," at his business association meetings. The pride in his voice was unmistakable, the same pride that had been conspicuously absent whenever my name came up in conversation. The engagement announcement sent the family into overdrive. David and Sarah had chosen the Auberge du Soleil in Napa Valley for their spring wedding, a venue that cost more than most people's annual salaries. The guest list included judges, politicians, and senior partners from competing firms. It was shaping up to be the social event of the year for our family. "Sarah's dress is custom Vera Wang," Aunt Patricia announced at my cousin's graduation party, showing photos on her phone to anyone within earshot. And David surprised her with a honeymoon in the Maldives, first class, of course. When you're successful, why not enjoy it? Meanwhile, my own life had transformed dramatically, but my family remained completely oblivious. I'd moved out of my studio apartment into a beautiful one-bedroom loft in the Arts District. My team had grown to 8 employees. We'd been featured in 3 major business publications and had a waiting list of potential clients stretching into the next quarter. But when family members saw me at gatherings, they still saw the same struggling Maya from 2 years ago. "Maya, sweetie, are you eating enough?" Mom asked at David's engagement party, looking at me with concern. "You look thin. Are you sure this computer work isn't too stressful? You know David's firm is still hiring for their IT department." I bit back a laugh. Our company had just closed a Series A funding round that would have made David's annual salary look like pocket change. But to my mother, I was still the struggling daughter who needed rescuing. Uncle Tom's commentary was even more tone-deaf. "Maya's still playing around with her computer hobby," he told a group of his business friends at the same party. "We keep hoping she'll grow out of it and find something stable. Maybe when she runs out of money, she'll get serious about her future." One of his friends, a tech-savvy restaurant owner, perked up. "Wait, what kind of computer work does she do?" "Oh, you know, websites and apps and things like that." Uncle Tom waved dismissively. "Nothing serious. Kid stuff, really." If Uncle Tom had bothered to ask, he would have learned that his friend's restaurant chain was actually considering implementing our inventory management system. The irony was lost on him completely. The most telling moment came when David announced that he'd been asked to speak at a local business leadership conference. The family treated it like he'd been invited to address Congress. "David's going to be the keynote speaker for emerging business leaders," Dad announced proudly at Sunday dinner. "Finally, someone in our family is getting the recognition they deserve." I nearly choked on my wine. 3 weeks earlier, I delivered the opening keynote at the same conference series, but to a larger audience and specifically about innovation and technology. My talk had been recorded and shared online, garnering over 50,000 views. But since I'd never mentioned it to my family, and since they'd never bothered to Google my name or company, they remained blissfully unaware. Their blindness was becoming their weakness, and I was beginning to understand that their opinion of me said more about their limitations than mine. The invitation to Uncle Tom's annual summer reunion arrived in my inbox with its usual fanfare. Every year, he hosted what he called the Chen Family Showcase, a lavish dinner party that doubled as a networking event for his business associates and an opportunity for the family to celebrate their collective achievements. This year's invitation was particularly elaborate, featuring gold lettering and formal language that made it sound more like a corporate gala than a family gathering. "Join us for an evening of celebration as we honor the remarkable accomplishments of the Chen family's next generation of leaders," the invitation read. "Featured guests will include members of the local business community and media representatives, highlighting our region's most promising young professionals." David had been practically vibrating with excitement about the event for weeks. He'd secured coverage from Channel 7 News, whose business reporter would be filming segments about successful young professionals in the legal field. The story was meant to showcase rising stars who were making their mark in traditional, established industries. "This is huge, Maya," David had called to tell me, his voice brimming with pride. "Channel 7 wants to feature me as an example of young leadership in law. They're going to film right at Uncle Tom's dinner. Finally, our family is going to get some real recognition." The not-so-subtle implication hung in the air. Real recognition for real achievements, not whatever I was doing with my computers. Uncle Tom had planned the evening like a military operation. He'd hired caterers, a photographer, and even a small chamber quartet for background music. The guest list read like a who's who of local business elite: bank presidents, real estate moguls, and established professionals who Uncle Tom had been cultivating relationships with for decades. "I want this to be perfect," he'd told my mother during one of their planning calls that I'd inadvertently overheard. David's success reflects well on all of us. It shows we raised our children right, with proper values and realistic goals. The contrast wasn't lost on me. This celebration was explicitly designed to showcase David's traditional career trajectory, while implicitly highlighting how well the family had steered their children away from risky, unconventional paths. I was welcome to attend, of course, but clearly as a supporting character in David's success story. "You should come, Maya," David had said when we discussed it. "It'll be good for you to see what real professional success looks like. Maybe it'll inspire you to think more seriously about your future." I'd initially considered skipping the event entirely. The thought of sitting through another evening of watching my family celebrate achievements while dismissing my own felt exhausting. But Grandma Rose had called me specifically to encourage my attendance. "Maya, sweetheart, I have a feeling about this dinner," she'd said, her voice carrying that mysterious tone she sometimes got when she sensed something brewing. "I think you should be there. Sometimes the universe has perfect timing, and I suspect Saturday night might be one of those times." Her confidence was infectious, even though I couldn't understand what she was seeing that I wasn't. "Grandma, what do you mean?" "Trust me, dear. Sometimes the best revelations happen when we least expect them. Wear something nice, hold your head high, and let whatever happens happen." As the date approached, I found myself caught between dreading the evening and feeling strangely curious about Grandma Rose's mysterious certainty. Something in her voice suggested she knew something I didn't, but when I pressed her for details, she just smiled and said, "Some surprises are worth waiting for." The stage was set for what promised to be either the most humiliating or most vindicating evening of my life. The evening unfolded exactly as I'd expected for the first hour. Uncle Tom's dining room gleamed under crystal chandeliers, filled with the low murmur of successful professionals discussing quarterly reports and market trends. David held court near the fireplace, resplendent in his new Italian suit, regaling Uncle Tom's business associates with stories from his latest high-profile case. The Channel 7 news crew moved discreetly around the room, capturing B-roll footage of the elegant gathering. I sat quietly at my assigned seat, making polite conversation with family friends, while internally counting down the minutes until I could reasonably excuse myself. Grandma Rose, seated beside me, kept giving me knowing looks that I couldn't decipher, her eyes twinkling with what seemed like barely contained excitement. "Ladies and gentlemen," Uncle Tom announced, tapping his wine glass with a silver knife. "If I could have your attention, we're about to begin filming our interview segment with David Chen, one of our region's most promising young legal minds." The room settled into respectful silence as the news crew positioned their cameras. David straightened his tie and flashed his most confident smile, clearly in his element. This was his moment, the culmination of years of careful career building and family validation. "I'm here with David Chen," the reporter began, "senior partner at Morrison, Klein & Associates, discussing the rising generation of legal professionals who are reshaping our business landscape through traditional excellence and dedication to—" Her earpiece crackled, interrupting mid-sentence. She touched her ear, frowning slightly, then looked confused. "I'm sorry. I'm getting some breaking news from the studio." She paused, listening intently, her expression shifting from confusion to surprise to something approaching excitement. "Excuse me," she said, turning away from David to address the room. "We've just received some significant breaking news about a major business story happening right here in our city tonight. We need to immediately shift our coverage to a much bigger story." David's smile faltered. Uncle Tom looked annoyed. "What could be more important than—" "We need to speak with Maya Chen immediately," the reporter announced, scanning the room. "Is Maya Chen here tonight?" The room fell into absolute silence. Every head turned toward me. I felt my heart stop. That's my niece," Uncle Tom stammered, pointing in my direction with obvious confusion. The reporter approached me with urgent energy, her cameraman following closely behind. "Ms. Chen, we just received confirmation that your company, Streamline Solutions, has been acquired by Tech Global Corporation for $50 million, making you one of the youngest female entrepreneurs in our state's history to achieve a major exit. Can you comment on this acquisition?" The words hit the room like a physical explosion. Uncle Tom's wine glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on his hardwood floor. David's mouth fell open, his confident posture crumbling. My mother gasped audibly. The carefully orchestrated celebration of traditional success had been hijacked by the very person they dismissed as a delusional dreamer. I started, my own voice catching with shock. I'd known the acquisition talks were progressing quickly, but I'd expected the announcement to come next week. The timing was surreal, almost cinematically perfect. "Ms. Chen," the reporter continued, "our sources indicate this deal positions you as a major player in the business technology sector. How does it feel to achieve this level of success at just 24? Around me, my family sat frozen in various states of shock and disbelief while the cameras rolled and the lights illuminated the most perfectly timed reversal of fortune I could have ever imagined. The transformation in the room was immediate and devastating for everyone who had spent years dismissing my dreams. Uncle Tom stood frozen beside his shattered wine glass, his face cycling through confusion, shock, and what could only be described as panic. The man who had confidently introduced David as our family's real success story just minutes earlier now looked like he was trying to solve an impossible math problem. 50 million? He stammered, his voice barely audible over the sudden buzz of conversation that erupted around us. David's reaction was the most telling. His confident posture collapsed entirely, shoulders sagging as if the air had been sucked out of him. The cameras that had been focused on him moments before were now trained on me, and I could see him processing the magnitude of what this meant. His biggest career achievement, the promotion he'd worked 80-hour weeks to earn, had just been overshadowed by the little sister he'd patronized for years. "Maya," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I don't understand. How is this possible? You never said anything about—" He trailed off, realizing how that sentence would end. I never said anything because no one had ever bothered to ask seriously. Every time I'd tried to share genuine updates about my company's growth, I'd been interrupted, dismissed, or politely redirected to discussions about real careers. My mother burst into tears, but they weren't tears of joy. They were tears of guilt and realization. "Oh my God, Maya," she sobbed, covering her face with her hands. "What have we done? We've been so horrible to you. I told you to get a backup plan. I told you to stop dreaming and be realistic." The business associates who had been hanging on David's every word minutes before were now crowding around me, suddenly very interested in networking with the young entrepreneur they'd barely acknowledged during cocktail hour. Uncle Tom's carefully curated guest list of established professionals was witnessing the complete inversion of everything they'd assumed about success and achievement. "Ms. Chen," one of Uncle Tom's banking contacts interrupted, his tone dramatically different from the polite disinterest he'd shown me earlier. "I don't know if you remember me, but we met briefly when you arrived. I'd love to discuss investment opportunities if you're considering future ventures." Aunt Patricia stood slack-jawed, her phone forgotten in her hand, despite her usual impulse to document every family milestone on social media. The woman who had spent the evening showing pictures of David and Sarah's expensive wedding plans was now staring at a family member whose single business transaction was worth more than David would likely earn in his first decade as a senior partner. Sarah, David's fiancée, looked genuinely confused and slightly annoyed that her carefully planned spotlight moment had been hijacked. She'd arrived expecting to be part of the evening's success story, positioned as the accomplished woman marrying into a family of achievers. Now she was watching her future sister-in-law command the attention of every person in the room while her own accomplishments seemed suddenly modest by comparison. The reporter continued asking questions, oblivious to the family drama unfolding behind her camera. "Ms. Chen, what does this acquisition mean for the future of small business technology? Will you be staying on to lead the integration?" As I answered her questions with growing confidence, I could see my family struggling to reconcile the Maya they'd dismissed with the Maya being celebrated on camera. The cognitive dissonance was written across their faces. How had their struggling dreamer become the most successful person in the room without them noticing? The evening they'd planned to showcase traditional achievement had become an accidental celebration of everything they'd failed to understand about innovation, risk-taking, and the changing nature of success itself. As the reporter's questions continued and the cameras rolled, something profound shifted inside me. The validation I'd craved for so long was finally happening, but not in the way I'd imagined. Standing there in Uncle Tom's dining room, surrounded by the shocked faces of people who had dismissed my dreams for years, I felt an unexpected sense of calm wash over me. This wasn't the vindictive triumph I'd fantasized about during my lowest moments. I wasn't thinking about how wrong they'd been or how satisfying it felt to prove them right. Instead, I felt something deeper and more meaningful. The quiet confidence that comes from knowing you stayed true to yourself when everyone else wanted you to be someone different. "Ms. Chen," the reporter continued, "many young entrepreneurs struggle with family support during the early stages of building a company. How important was your family's encouragement in reaching this milestone?" The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. I could have delivered a devastating blow with complete honesty. I could have talked about the years of dismissal, the constant pressure to get a real job, the way my achievements were minimized while David's were celebrated. I could have mentioned overhearing my brother and uncle discussing my inevitable failure just months earlier. But looking at my mother's tear-stained face, at Uncle Tom's obvious mortification, at David's wounded pride, I realized that revenge wasn't what I wanted. What I'd been seeking all along wasn't their validation, it was my own self-respect. "Family relationships can be complicated," I said carefully, my voice steady and diplomatic. "Everyone expresses love and concern differently. My family taught me the value of hard work and persistence, even when we didn't always see eye to eye on the path I was taking. Sometimes the people who challenge us the most are doing it because they care about our future, even if their methods aren't always perfect." I caught Grandma Rose's eye across the room. She was beaming with pride. But more than that, she was nodding with approval at how I was handling this moment. Her earlier words echoed in my mind. "The best victories are the ones you have to claw your way toward." The reporter smiled at my diplomatic response. "That's a very mature perspective. What advice would you give to other young entrepreneurs who might be facing skepticism from loved ones?" "Trust yourself," I said without hesitation. "Listen to feedback, consider different perspectives, but ultimately, you have to live with the consequences of your choices. If you believe in something strongly enough to sacrifice for it, then that belief is worth protecting, even when it's uncomfortable." As I spoke, I realized I was talking to my younger self as much as to any hypothetical entrepreneurs watching this interview. The Maya who had sat in the same room months ago, devastated by Uncle Tom's dismissal, needed to hear these words. She needed to know that the validation she was desperately seeking from her family was actually something she could create for herself. The cameras captured my words, but they couldn't capture the internal transformation happening simultaneously. I was no longer the girl seeking approval from people who couldn't see her worth. I had become a woman who created her own worth, regardless of who recognized it. The reporter wrapped up the interview, and as the camera stopped rolling, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. I hadn't won because I'd proven them wrong. I'd won because I'd proven myself right. That distinction made all the difference. As the news crew packed up their equipment and the formal interview concluded, an uncomfortable silence settled over Uncle Tom's dining room. The carefully orchestrated celebration of traditional success had transformed into something none of us had prepared for. The other guests, sensing the family tension beneath the surface of this unexpected news story, began making polite excuses and drifting toward the door. My mother was the first to approach me, her face still streaked with tears and mascara. She moved hesitantly, as if unsure whether she had the right to celebrate with me after years of discouraging exactly this outcome. "Maya, sweetheart," she began, her voice trembling with emotion. "I am so sorry. I've been a terrible mother. I was scared for you, and instead of supporting your dreams, I tried to talk you out of them." She took a shaky breath. "I thought I was protecting you from disappointment, but I was really just protecting myself from watching you potentially fail." Her honesty was unexpected and disarming. I could see the genuine remorse in her eyes, the weight of all those moments when she'd chosen David's achievements over acknowledging mine. "Mom," I said softly, "I know you were trying to help in your own way." "No," she interrupted, shaking her head firmly. "I wasn't helping. I was letting my own fears make me small, and I tried to make you small too. You deserved better from me. You deserved a mother who believed in you unconditionally." Uncle Tom approached next, his usual boisterous confidence replaced by visible humility. The man who had dismissed my little computer thing so casually now looked genuinely ashamed. "Maya, I owe you an enormous apology," he said, his voice uncharacteristically quiet. "I've been an arrogant fool. I thought because I didn't understand technology, it wasn't real business. I was wrong about everything." He paused, struggling with words that clearly didn't come easily. "I've been in business for 30 years, and I've never achieved anything close to what you just accomplished. I should have been asking you for advice instead of giving you lectures about getting serious." The most difficult conversation came with David. My brother stood apart from the family group, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. When he finally walked over, he couldn't quite meet my eyes. "Maya, he started, then stopped, shaking his head. "I don't even know how to begin apologizing for the things I've said, not just tonight, but for years." His voice cracked slightly. "I was supposed to be your big brother, supposed to support you, and instead, I was your biggest critic." I studied his face, seeing genuine regret mixed with something that looked like grief. He was mourning his role as the family's golden child, but more than that, he was confronting the reality of who he'd become in relation to me. "David," I said gently, "you worked hard for your success. That hasn't changed." "But it's different now, isn't it?" he asked with painful honesty. "I spent so much time looking down on what you were doing that I never bothered to actually understand it. I was so invested in being right about traditional paths to success that I couldn't see you were creating an entirely new path." He extended his hand, a gesture that felt both formal and deeply personal. "What you've built is incredible. I'm proud to be your brother, even if I've done a terrible job showing it." The conversations were awkward and imperfect, but they were real. For the first time in years, my family was seeing me clearly, and more importantly, they were seeing themselves clearly in relation to me. 2 hours later, as the last of Uncle Tom's guests filtered out into the warm summer evening, I found myself sitting on his back patio with Grandma Rose. The patio where I'd stood heartbroken just months earlier, questioning everything about my path, now felt like a completely different place. The same stars shone overhead, but I was no longer the same person looking up at them. "You knew, didn't you?" I asked her, watching her eyes twinkle with satisfaction in the dim patio lighting. "When you told me to come tonight, you knew something was going to happen." She chuckled, that warm laugh that had comforted me through childhood scrapes and adolescent heartbreaks. "I didn't know about the acquisition, sweetheart, but I knew you were building something special, and I suspected the universe had a sense of timing about these things." She patted my hand. "Sometimes the best revelations happen when the people who need to witness them are all in the same room." As we sat together in comfortable silence, I reflected on the evening's events. The validation from the news coverage felt wonderful, but it wasn't what had truly changed me. What had shifted was my relationship with needing that validation at all. "Grandma," I said slowly, "I spent so many years wanting them to believe in me. But tonight, when it finally happened, I realized I'd already learned to believe in myself. Their approval feels nice, but it doesn't feel necessary anymore." "That's exactly right," she said with deep satisfaction. "When you know your own worth, other people's recognition becomes a bonus, not a requirement." The next morning, I woke up to hundreds of messages congratulating me on the acquisition. Interviews requests from major business publications, LinkedIn notifications from industry leaders wanting to connect, and dozens of texts from college friends who'd seen the news coverage. But the message that meant the most was a simple text from my mother. "I'm proud of you, and I should have said that years ago." 3 weeks later, I was standing on a stage at the Regional Entrepreneur Conference, delivering a keynote address to an audience of young business owners. But this time, my family was in the audience. Not just David, who'd attended similar events as part of his professional development, but my parents, Uncle Tom, Aunt Patricia, and even Grandma Rose, who'd insisted on coming despite the 2-hour drive. "The hardest part of building something new," I told the audience, "isn't the technical challenges or the market competition. It's maintaining faith in your vision when the people closest to you can't see what you're seeing. But here's what I learned. Their inability to see your vision doesn't invalidate it. It just means you're building something truly innovative." I caught sight of my family in the third row. My mother was crying again, but these were different tears. Tears of pride and understanding. David was taking notes, genuinely engaged with concepts he'd once dismissed. Uncle Tom was nodding along, his skepticism replaced by curiosity about entrepreneurship in the digital age. After my speech, as I fielded questions from aspiring entrepreneurs, I felt a profound sense of completion. Not because I'd finally won my family's approval, but because I'd built something meaningful that extended far beyond their opinion of it. I'd started this journey as a young woman desperate to prove herself worthy of love and respect. I was ending it as someone who created her own worth, shared it generously with others, and understood that the most powerful victories are the ones where everyone wins, even the people who doubted you. The girl who'd once needed their validation had become a woman who offered inspiration to others struggling with the same doubts. That transformation was worth more than any acquisition price, and it was something no one could ever take away.